The winds of the steppes once carried the thunder of hooves and the cries of conquerors. On this field, the Mongol tide had seemed unstoppable, their empire stretching beyond the horizon. Yet even empires fall, and the world believed the age of Mongol terror had ended. But empires do not die so easily. In the ruins of their camps, fragments remained. Symbols of power, forgotten but not gone. One such relic, tarnished and broken, lay buried beneath the weight of time. Yet its presence stirred something old, something that had only slept. The Mongol legacy was not erased, it was waiting. In the silence of forgotten halls, whispers of conquest echoed. Men who remembered the old ways gathered in secret, plotting the return of what once was. Their leader, cloaked in shadow, spoke not of peace but of dominion. The Mongol spirit would rise again, reshaped but unbroken. Once, this fortress stood defiant against the storm of invasion. Now, it was a monument to defeat, its banners torn and its walls blackened. Yet from within those ruins, something stirred. The ghosts of the past did not rest, and neither would those who claimed their name. Far from the courts of kings, a new force was rising. Not born of noble blood, but of fire and fury. A man with no throne and no crown, yet in his eyes burned the ambition of emperors. He rode not for glory, but for dominion. The world would soon know his name. Timur, the lame one, they called him. But his limp was the only weakness he bore. His sword arm was strong, his will unshakable. He had learned war from those who wrote its rules, and he would rewrite them in blood. The age of Mongol fear was not over, it had only just begun. His army was not vast, but it was fierce. Veterans of 100 battles, men who followed not for coin but for conquest. They camped in the dark, their fires dimmed, their voices hushed. Yet in their silence was the promise of a storm. The world would burn again, and they would light the match. The cities of the West believed themselves safe. Their walls were strong, their armies confident. They had faced the Mongols once and survived. But they did not know the difference between an empire and a memory. And memories, when awakened, could be more dangerous than armies. From the dust of the earth, they rose. Not ghosts, but men driven by a hunger that no peace could satisfy. Their banners were new, but their purpose was ancient. The world had forgotten the sound of their approach. Soon, it would remember in terror. He did not seek a kingdom. He sought an empire. Not of gold or law, but of fear itself. The world had seen Mongol wrath, but Timur would make it bleed anew. The Ottoman believed they had survived the storm. But the storm had only changed its name. The riders came not as raiders but as shadows given form. Each man carried the weight of forgotten wars and the promise of new ruins. Their horses knew the scent of fear. Timur rode at their head, not shouting orders but listening to the silence that would soon follow. He remembered the taste of defeat. Not his own, but his father's. The humiliation carved into his youth like the scars on his face. He would not avenge it with words or diplomacy. He would carve his response in stone and ash. The Ottomans had heard whispers. They dismissed them as old wives' tales. Mongols did not rise again. Empires did not return from the grave. But their hands trembled on their weapons, and their breath misted in the cold air of doubt. They spoke of tactics, of walls and catapults. They drew lines on maps with confident fingers. But fear leaked through the cracks in their voices. One name repeated like a curse. Timur. Not man, but force of nature. He had seen their camp. Not scattered or chaotic, but precise. Tents arranged like a coming storm. Fires burning without smoke. Horses that did not neigh but waited in perfect stillness. He rode back with news that would curdle blood. He did not speak to his men. They did not need speeches. They had followed him through fire and betrayal. Their loyalty was not to a flag or crown. It was to the certainty that under him, they would never kneel again. His voice cracked like a whip across the courtyard. They came. Not tomorrow, not next season. Now. With the speed of hunger and the silence of death. The walls that had stood for centuries trembled in the distance. The iron sang under his hammer. Each strike a prayer, each blade a hope. The city would need steel. But steel alone had never stopped what was coming. He worked faster, though he knew it would not be enough. The boy had never seen war. Only heard songs of glory and victory. Now, his knees threatened to betray him. His captain said nothing. Only stood beside him. Sometimes presence was heavier than speech. No prayer was spoken. No God was called. Only purpose. The blade caught the dying light, reflecting it like a promise. Tomorrow, the world would wake to a new kind of silence. One born not of peace, but of conquest. The forge roared as if it knew the hour. Each piece he shaped bore the weight of what was to come. Steel for swords, for shields, for the hands that might never hold them. His hammer did not slow. It could not. The boy would need more than prayers. He would need steel that held. The boy looked at his hands and saw his father's hands. Strong, sure, gone. He tried to remember how they had felt gripping the plow, the axe, the cup at evening meal. Now these same hands shook. Not from cold. From knowing. The songs had lied. Glory was not gold. It was grit. The captain had buried 3 brothers, 2 sons, 1 love. He had no words left for the boy. Only presence. Only the shared weight of what waited beyond the ridge. The boy would learn soon enough. Some lessons came sharp, with blood and fire. The mist clung like a shroud. No birds sang. No winds stirred the banners. Only the breath of men who knew their names might not be called again. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, from the far line, a horn. Low. Long final. The blade hissed free. Clean. Bright. Ready. The boy's breath caught. He had dreamed of this moment in flickering firelight, in whispered tales. Now it was here, colder than winter steel, heavier than all his yesterdays. He was no longer a boy. Not quite a man. The fog swallowed them and gave them back. Helmets. Spears. Shields like hunger. Their drums did not hurry. They did not need to. They had come for more than land. They came for legacy. For the kind of silence that followed fire. He saw the smoke before the scream of steel. The boy was down there somewhere, among the ranks, among the prayers. The smith had given him all he could. Now the world would take what it would. He did not pray. He had never learned how. The boy's sword shook. Not from weakness. From waiting. The captain stepped forward. 1 pace. 2. The line behind them did not move. They would follow. They had no choice. The boy swallowed. Then stepped. Then ran. Steel met steel and song met scream. The world folded in on itself, all sound, all fury, all the weight of what they'd been told was right. The boy swung. Not for glory. Not for gold. For breath. For the boy he'd been. For the man he might not become. The forge would wait. The city would fall or stand. He had done what he could. The rest belonged to others now. To boys who had not yet learned to tremble. To captains who had stopped speaking. To silence. He walked. And the hammer did not lighten. He did not look back. The weight of the hammer had passed. Others would lift it now. Others would choose. He had only walked far enough to no longer hear the clash. The road bent ahead. It always did. The boy who had taken up the sword too soon stared at the path ahead. His hands were not steady. His breath was not calm. But his eyes were open. The captain had taught him nothing except that lesson. The city had no name anymore. Only scars. And still they came. Not for victory. Not for vengeance. For something quieter. Something that lived in the space between one breath and the next. She had seen every path. Every plan. Every possible end. None of them led to peace. Only to quieter wars. She folded her hands. The map would wait. The choice would come. The water did not forgive. It only carried what was given. The child looked up. The man watching was not kind. He was not cruel. He simply was. And that was worse. The edge would decide nothing. It never had. The hand that held it would. The night breathed in the silence. It was the last thing he would take before the dawn. The bridge would hold. Or it would not. Either way, someone would fall. The villagers did not stop. The figures did not hurry. Time had already chosen its side. The words had been written in hope. In certainty. In the belief that ink could hold back the tide. Now they ran like rain. Like blood. Like all things that begin with purpose. The reflection had always lied. Or perhaps it had simply been too early. The door opened. The air did not change. The silence simply deepened. The field remembered every fall. Every name. Every silence that followed the scream. The figure walked on. Not in search of meaning. Only in search of the end of the field. The edge of the field was not a boundary but a beginning. The mist carried voices that had never been spoken, names that had never been called. The figure stepped forward and the ground did not resist. The mirror had never shown the truth, only the shape of what was lost. Now, even that shape was breaking. The veins spread like roots searching for soil that no longer existed. Beyond the door, there was no sound, no texture, no breath. Only light that erased itself the moment it was seen. The figure crossed the threshold and the door closed without a sound. The book had been written and unwritten 1,000 times. Each word had fled back into the silence from which it came. The quill would wait for another hand, though none would come. The tide had turned for the last time. The shore remembered the footsteps, but the waves would smooth them away. There was no more need for words, no more need for waiting. The story had ended where it began.